you want to start by telling me your name and where you're from, and give me a little brief background on your life, and then you can get to the education.
Okay. You're not going to be asking questions in between. You just want me to, okay.
It's as you like.
Okay. Okay.
So we'll just go with the flow.
Okay. Go with the flow. My name is George Churinoff, and I'm from Chicago, Illinois, United States, originally, and was educated in my university years mainly in Boston. Left Chicago to see the East Coast, and remember crying the first night I went to see the university I was going to go to, because it was all lit up at night and everything, thinking this is where I was going to learn about the world.
Where was it?
It was a school called MIT in Cambridge, right next to Boston. And I studied science there, physics, for 4 years. And I had some very bright classmates, very competitive kind of place, but very really interested in understanding the fundamentals of science, feeling that if you understand the fundamentals, then you'll be able to, whatever progress takes place, you'll be able to be on the forefront of it if you know the fundamentals. And while I was there, even though as a child I think I had felt that when I grew up, what I wanted to do was to be educated and to understand science, and somehow would thereby be able to control my life, I found a lot of the people that were there weren't so happy. That is, the people that had already made their careers in science. They were very competitive and sometimes very jealous of others, and what we find everywhere in the world. And I began to try to find what was, for myself, what would be the cause of happiness, and searched in various material ways, as we all do, and began reading about the various religions of the world. I didn't have the fortune to feel that Christianity had an answer for me. I think it was just my misfortune not to be able to connect up with that. And I read, had one teacher who taught Hinduism, Houston Smith, and studied a little bit about that, and studied a little bit about Sufism and some other religions, and also Buddhism. Alan Watts, read some of his books, and found that very, somehow very tasty. I didn't really, in that period or the period directly afterwards, I really didn't find much taste in the academic things, kind of academic things that had been written, like the Tibetan Book of the Dead. I guess, I don't know if people would call them academic. I'd call them kind of dry. They didn't really talk about how to practice so much as mysticism and other kinds of things. And I went off to graduate school for a couple of years at University of Pennsylvania, also in physics, and came back after 2 years to MIT, feeling that I really didn't, this isn't what I was going to be doing, somehow.
Can you just describe a little bit what it was about physics that was attracting you? Like, you get into that a little bit.
Well, I guess what attracted me to physics is that it's very fundamental. It's the basis for all of the modern wonders that we have: videotape machines and internet and transistors and spaceships, and all of our knowledge of the world seems to be somehow reaffirmed by that, whether it be, every realm, genetics, oceanography, crops, biology, everything seems to lead back to a reaffirmation of the truth of physics. You know, it's something that people feel is, if you understood that, you could, with that kind of basic understanding, that as a springboard, you could create a lot of things. You could invent things, you know, electronics or whatever. You could help in space exploration. You could help in inner exploration in the body and so forth. But physics doesn't have, as I discovered, my own point of view, didn't have an explanation of our own human experience. I think in universities, people might have said that was in the realm of something else, maybe religion or philosophy, the meaning of life. And that was at a certain point, although I hadn't been trained in philosophy or religion, and I hadn't seen that as my goal at the beginning, I started to sort of turn in that direction more and more as time went on. But I think the education in physics and association with people in science, you know, very bright people, was a great, it's not something that's wasted. Anything that we do in life is not wasted. There's some way that you can use it. If not at that time, you can use later. Certainly the analytical mind that's developed by mathematics and pure physics and thinking about these subjects, even visualization, you know, three-dimensional space and so forth and so on, very useful in Buddhism. I found quite a number of my fellow Buddhist monks in the past have been physicists, quite a surprising number, you know, educated Caltech or Cambridge or wherever else. So there's really not some people might think, well, wow, you studied physics, now you're studying Buddhism. It's like, first you studied music, then you studied physics, sort of like that, you know, seemingly diverse, disparate things, but they have a lot in relation in that they're seeking for some fundamental truth, and Buddhist philosophy depends very much on analysis, on reasoning, on understanding, not just on having explained to you some way how to bear with life, but a path that can help to lead out of that suffering and to become a real complete human being and to be able to sort of fulfill the definition of being human and to be able to help others. So I found that very, when I first began to read a little bit about Buddhism, I found that very appealing. That explanation that there were almost some laws there in the psychic realm, like the law of cause and effect, that paralleled the basic laws of physics, and that by understanding those, and not just understanding them in blind faith, but experimenting in the laboratory of your own mind, and researching and finding whether or not these things were actually true. And if they were true, as is the case in physics, then you're left with having checked a hypothesis and found it to be valid. Then you're left in a position of being able to create from that, to be able to use that information in some kind of constructive way. It's not just mere information. It's something that, in the case of Buddhism, that gives you an idea of how to guide your life, how to find some orientation. So I started reading more and more about not so much only Buddhism, other kind of mystical, philosophical systems. And I remember reading one particular philosopher named Gurdjieff, who talked about, at one of his books, if I remember correctly, and it's always interesting, what one remembers isn't always exactly what was on the written page, but if I remember something to the effect that if one was engaged in a spiritual quest, you had to be able to make your living with your left foot, which I took to mean like kind of chugging out, you know, like on a old-fashioned sewing machine, you know, mindlessly being able to make a living while your mind was actively engaged in your spiritual quest. This is how he put it. And I thought to myself, what could I do with my left foot? Well, I could teach physics. So I got a job teaching at a boys' school in Connecticut, which was a private school, so it didn't require all of the kinds of teaching credentials that often public schools do, but it was a very prestigious school. And stayed there for a couple of years, but began to get a little bit afraid seeing the pictures of the teachers up on the walls in the master's room, what they call the teacher's lounge is called the master's room. It wasn't just a teacher's lounge. You know, so-and-so Hendrickson came 1923, died 1957, you know. Could almost see my name up on the wall. George Chernoff came 1972, died 2010, never spread his wings. I could almost see my, you know, little inscription up there. So I requested some advice from the headmaster, and he gave me a good recommendation, and I applied for some jobs overseas. And of the various couple of jobs that I was offered, I decided to go to Beirut, Lebanon, rather than someplace in Europe, Austria, or something, because it sounded like that would be really a different philosophy of life. The Western philosophical tradition, Christianity, and so forth, our materialistic society, at least in the West, had left me feeling that that wasn't where I was going to find my answer. So being very cautious, not a good quality, but just sort of wanting to keep one foot in the American community and sort of dabble out with the other, I got a job in Beirut at the American Community School there for a couple of years, and taught students that weren't quite the caliber of the students that I was teaching in the States, but it gave me a chance to travel. So I traveled in Syria and Jordan and Egypt, Turkey, Iran. Never made it to Israel, never made it to Iraq in those days. And also I didn't find anything of the Sufis or anything that was really spiritually elevating other than in the realm of yoga, which I'd met a yoga teacher there. Probably I could have met in Chicago or New York, Boston for that matter, a gentleman from India whose class I took. Also read a book on yoga by an American who had done his PhD thesis on yoga, and I thought, maybe this is where I had to start, controlling the body, you know. And so in 1974, in the spring, I was heading overland after completing my contract in Beirut, heading overland to India, hopefully to study yoga. So if I went back to the States and studying, instead of teaching physics, I would teach yoga, I thought. Well, as it turned out, on my way through Syria and Turkey and Iran and finally Afghanistan, when I was in Afghanistan, I met two young ladies, one of whom had just come from a course at a monastery called Kopan in Kathmandu. And she was full of enthusiasm about this course. And the Lama that was there, Lama Yeshe, was supposed to be the real thing. Wasn't interested in collecting Mercedes-Benzes or, having lots of money and so forth. Very compassionate, very wise. The other young lady I met was on her way to Kopan, full of enthusiasm to go there. So I got caught up in their energy. I kind of remember feeling that this might be what I was looking for all these years. It wasn't about the body. It was about the mind. It wasn't physical yoga. It was actually meditation. And so very enthused, I headed off to that course. I really didn't stop very much after that until I got to the monastery. I traveled through Pakistan, almost just on the train, straight through without stopping, I think. And through India, picked up my visa, and on my way to go to Nepal from Delhi, I did a detour, I guess, to Agra to see the Taj Mahal, famous building there. And right outside of, between Agra and somewhere around Varanasi, there is a train station called Mughal Sarai. I still remember it. The train had stopped, and I saw a gentleman getting off the train dressed in yellow robes. Maybe he may have been a Hindu, he may have been a Buddhist, I don't know till this day. But I looked at him, and he had a staff that he was holding, a wooden cane. Some young boys came up to him, and they were teasing him. They took the cane away, and they would put it toward him as though to give it back to him. And when he would reach out, they would take it away and laugh, and they were teasing him. And having been a teacher for these number of years and being very hard-headed and kind of fed up with India at that time, traveling, and I think some of my things had been stolen. So I looked out the window, and I looked at these boys, and I said, "Give that man his cane back." Very, with as much authority as I could muster. And they looked at me up at the window of the train, and they came at me with the cane as though to hit me, and I flinched, and they started laughing. They were getting an American or a Westerner at any rate, putting him in his due place. So having been a teacher, I got off the train to, quote, teach them a lesson, I thought. And when I got outside, the boy who had taken the cane, incredibly angry, his whole demeanor changed. His face bulged out, and he came at me with this stick and started to beat me. And for what seemed like a long time, could have been just a few hits, but anyway, I had welts, where the blood gets under the skin and on my hands and my arm and my face. And then he ran down the train with a stick. So even then, my endeavor had been without any kind of result except humiliation. I looked at the train, and I looked at the people. They're all looking out the windows, watching this man being beaten. And I yelled at them, "Why? Why do you let them do this?" I got back on the train, and I saw a sadhu, Indian sadhu, sitting on the floor, because often at that time, it's about 1974, the religious, even non-religious people would be allowed to travel for free if they sat near the toilets on the floor. Very dirty place. So he was sitting there. And I looked at him, not really expecting an answer, but just sensing he was a little bit different than the rest of these people. And I said, "Why?" And he looked up at me with some rather glazed eyes and said, "Karma." And somehow I felt this was my first meeting with the spiritual teacher. Somehow when you start to orient yourself in that direction, things begin to happen sometime. So I headed off to Kopan, having received my first beating on the way, and found that the meditation course, which Tibetans, Mongolians, various people to whom Buddhism is still part of their culture, are privy to. It's something that they have as part of their culture. Perhaps they don't even recognize it, the great value. Here was an actual method that material people of some success in the West are seeking out for an inner meaning of what life is actually about. Not just an intellectual level, but actually how to guide your life, how to find happiness. And I found a lot of very, very meaningful advice, even that very first meditation course, 1-month course. I remember feeling that somehow I had made the first step of getting off the racetrack of samsara instead of just the old-fashioned circle. I envisioned it as a kind of a racetrack. And stayed on. We did a meditation retreat afterwards, and as things progressed, spent time in Dharamsala that year, where the Dalai Lama lives, studying Tibetan, and more Buddhist fundamentals, meditation. Sometimes we say Buddhist philosophy, but Buddhist philosophy is not merely an intellectual pursuit. It might be for some people, maybe college professors, or maybe some monks also, monks and nuns. But the real purpose of it is, once you understand that, its whole purpose is to try to guide the mind in meditation, to get the correct view. If you do anything, Buddhism feels, you can do it much more quickly if you understand what you're doing. It's trying to beat down a tree with a branch is not going to be as effective as a few well-placed chops with a sharp axe. So if you understand the right point and you have some wisdom, some sharpness to your mind, you can make much more effect on your personality and your life and so forth. So having studied there and came back to Kopan, did some meditation retreat for about 3 months. And during the next course, some of the people were thinking of taking ordination that had been with me from the previous year. We'd all had quite an intense 1-year injection of Dharma, both at Kopan and in India at Dharamsala. And one friend mentioned he was thinking of becoming a monk, and I said, yeah, I thought I would like to too, but it seemed like there was something I had to do first. At that time, we used this expression, have a meaningful relationship. I don't know if people still use that expression. But he said, when's there going to be a better time? And I got to thinking, and I realized I didn't have a job waiting. I had some money saved up. I didn't have any responsibilities with family or other emotional responsibilities. In fact, I might not ever get back to India again if I went back to the States, let alone to be able to be in a frame of mind to take ordination. So with all of those conditions coming together, I decided to give it a stab, become a monk. And in I think in December of 1975 then, we took what's called intermediate renunciation vows, Barma Rapchung, with Lama Yeshe and Lama Sopa Rinpoche at Kopan Monastery. And in the spring of 76, so at that point we were able to live with the Sangha. And in the spring of 76, we traveled to Dharamsala and became novices with the junior tutor of the Dalai Lama, Khabje Trijang Rinpoche. And the following year, one of the monks and I, who's actually in Mongolia now, took in Gyatso, Adrian. We both took the Bhikshu ordination, Gelong ordination with Khabje Ling Rinpoche. So I stayed on at Kopan for a little more than 4 years. And Lama then sent me off to England, to Manjushri Institute, where I continued to study. And back to India for a large teaching, the Dharma celebration. And then Lama sent me off to Italy, where I stayed for many years at Istituto Lama Tzong Khapa, with perhaps a 2.5-year break in the middle to work at Tushita Meditation Center in Delhi. And at the end of that stay in Italy, it wasn't intended at the time, His Holiness the Dalai Lama was going to teach at Sera Je Monastery a text on emptiness, which myself and another monk had helped me for part of the time to translate into English, called the Madhyamaka Vatara. And so His Holiness teaching on that text, I was determined to go to that teaching and offered my translation to His Holiness and to the English participants. And it was at that time Lama Sopa Rinpoche requested me to teach Lama Osel, the reincarnation of Lama Yeshe, who had passed away some years before. And so I stayed at Sera then for about 3.5 years, teaching Lama Osel, reading, writing, arithmetic, as we say, and everything else that I could think of, science and history and everything else, get a little basis, how to tell time, how to read a train schedule and so forth. And since then, I've had a chance, since I retired from that position a couple of years ago, I've done some retreats in Nepal and in Dharamsala, done a little bit of yoga, and have had a chance to study. I've spent 3 months, a little more than 3 months in Mongolia, teaching at the new center that we started there, and helped to, even on the mundane side, to help to get the buildings together and all of that kind of stuff. And most recently spent 5 months in Western Australia, in Perth, at the Hayagriva Meditation Center, teaching there, and also in Bunbury, the Sister Center, Hospice of Mother Tara. And it's more or less for a long period of time in a certain amount of poverty to a certain degree, not great affluence. And then suddenly some affluence is available and some people are grabbing for it. Same thing in Russia and some of the other countries in which this has happened. Sometimes the mind has easily lost its balance and its contentment and wants to try to get that which other people are getting. And so one can begin to lose one's basic values that have been part of your culture, that you actually have an incredible resource, of honesty and morality, generosity, and faith in Buddhism, in teachers, lamas, and so forth. And sometimes that can be easily eroded, especially when there's a time when, even at the monasteries, because they've been through long periods of neglect, and many of the monks were forced to take families and so forth. There aren't a lot of examples of ordained monks, and sometimes there look to be rivalries between the various monasteries and so forth. One has to see beyond that, see that that's just a temporary situation, and remembering what's part of your culture, the great history of these countries, that incredible establishment of Buddha Dharma at one time, to perhaps let that, that faithful mind again rise in oneself, and try to work toward that goal rather than worrying about the individual rivalries that are going on, or the things that are written about in the newspapers. This Lama is doing this, this Lama is doing that, or whatever. People sometimes were a little bit dismayed by that. But it's natural. Whenever in our own lifetime we lose our way, we ourselves might make mistakes, let alone a whole culture, certainly when it's been under the yoke of an outside power for such a long period of time. Your basic philosophy and way of life, your culture, has been undermined. Then it's not surprising that people will lose their way at first. So those people that do feel sadness about that, they should try to change that state of mind into one which is courageous, to try to change the situation back again, because everything's changeable. These things are not, it's not all downhill. It's inevitable that there's going to be, even in our own lifetime, we may remember times when we began to slide into depression or into some bad habits, and then we someone helped us, or we pulled ourselves up by our own bootstraps, as we say, and made a turnaround.
Starting with the third.
So, is it possible to become enlightened? Yeah, I think so. I think, though, the Western mind, if I can say the American mind in particular, would like to have it right now in some, condensed, it's almost like instant soup or microwaved version that, due to our technology, is capable of being assimilated much more quickly and actualized immediately. There are methods in Buddhism, I believe, in which one, if one has the right prerequisites, that one might attain enlightenment in one lifetime. But it may not be, with that expectation, I think people might be disappointed. It's not a guaranteed thing. I think for me, what is more meaningful is the change I can see in my own life, in my own mind, over a year, over 5 years, over 10 years. That to me is more an indication that enlightenment can exist if someone as crazy as I could change their behavior even a little bit in a way that, although not let's say perfect or not bodhisattva-like in my behavior, still is better than it was. I can see that the mind has that potential to change. And if with as little effort as I've put in time and meditation, that change has taken place, I can imagine that when I do put energy over time, this life and in future lives, into developing concentration, to honing that wisdom, that understanding better and better, that even greater changes can take place. And I see the example of the teachers, great beings like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, people like that who, in their own behavior, manifest, show that great courage, that confidence. To me, to some people, it's very important, if they can see auras or if they have clairvoyance or something like that. To me, I don't know. That's not as important to me as seeing that there is a way, seeing the path. Some sense of where I'm going, that destination, and to try to keep, not just to have like a really short, intensive attempt, and then if I don't have any results to give up, but to keep on increasing that small effort over time for continuity. To me, that is what actually brings the confidence over time. If you just try for a short period of time expecting immediate results, sometimes you're disappointed because you can't plant seeds and stand over them, as my teacher Lama Yesh used to say, and just say, grow, pour more water, grow, put the lights on more, double the lights, double the water, double the fertilizer. They have their own natural period. And the same thing with our spiritual growth. So to me, some of the excitement that people have about wanting to do it this lifetime is not as important, that excitement, as a guiding force for me personally. Now, I can't say for others. To me, what, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, to have a goal in the distance that you're going to enlightenment. This is the destination. And along the way, there are going to be various stops. Like you take a long trip on the bus, you stop for tea in India, Sometimes it doesn't turn out so well. You might lose your change, or you have a bad tea. If you can keep that in the back of your mind, that you're on a long quest, and that you this is your goal. To me, that is more motivating than the excitement of trying to do something immediately. If enlightenment were so easy that people who were completely foreign to it could attain enlightenment simply by taking a correspondence course in this lifetime, I don't think it would be as valued as it is by the great beings. It's something that is very rare, and that which is rare and valuable is something that has to be achieved slowly, I feel. So I don't put as much emphasis on speed as on longevity, let's say.
Now it's your call.
I remember in college, university, wondering what was the reason that some people were happy, and how did one find that? It didn't seem to be the job you had. Some people could be happy in physics, other people weren't. Some people could be happy in high finance, it seemed, others weren't. And I remember reading a book by Alan Watts called The Wisdom of Insecurity, which was talking about one of the words of the day, insecurity, and the rapid pace of our age. Basically, he was talking about the wisdom of impermanence, how that if you saw that everything was changing, there was nothing, no secure thing that you envisioned to try to hold on to that could give you that security. In that book, he also talked about a little bit about karma. I don't know if he even mentioned the word. He may have. But I do remember him saying that if you wanted to be loved, you had to love others. And from many points of view, that seems so obvious. But that almost came as a surprise, like, oh, wow, maybe that's the law of cause and effect and the spiritual realm. That So that I think that gave me some feeling that there was something that one could do, both in eliminating defects from the mind and in positively trying to develop, causes for good. But I think there are many events that took place over the years that kind of reaffirmed various aspects of the Buddhist presentation or Buddha's presentation of these four realities, things that are true for an Arya being. We call them the noble truths or Arya truths. That I remember one experience I had in England at the center there. Some friends had invited me over for dinner, and the mom had made this beautiful, wholesome meal set out on the table, and delicious. It smelled great. It was beautiful. The two boys, they must have been like 5 and 6 or 6 and 7, something like that. They were being called to the table, but they had seen a little piece of candy in the corner. In Italy, they called them chiclets, sort of like the cheap little colored candy they'd give you when they didn't have enough change at the supermarket to give you the change. And it wasn't even red or green or some nice color. It was gray, and it was in the dust. And Mom was pulling them from one side, and they were looking at this candy with their eyes, and sort of stretching out toward it, not wanting to go to the delicious food that was up on the table. And I thought, my gosh, this is exactly what the saints, the spiritual beings, the Buddhas must be seeing when they look at us. There's this incredible, casserole, if you want. What do you call it? Smorgasbord of spiritual insights to be made that can bring happiness, both immediate tranquility and causes for future happiness. But we're caught up in icky-picky, little, sort of gray, not even really colorful if you really look at it. We're striving to get something off there in the side, in the dust. And because of our preoccupation with that, we can never turn our attention to spiritual things. In fact, when we do turn our attention there, it often is materialized, materialistic, made materialistic to it, something to get. How many initiations have you had? How many empowerments have you had? How many prostrations have you done? I've done this or that. I'm at this level. In traveling in Malaysia some years ago, I remember seeing at one of the centers, someone had a little certificate on the wall. I went up to look at it, and it said that they had attained the 2nd or 3rd jhana. In the Theravada tradition, they talk about the various meditative, in Sanskrit we say dhyana, or in Tibetan samten, the meditative concentrations in the form and formless absorptions. And even then, I think it's not quite as easy to attain as one might think. But this is something that was, person had the certificate on their wall as this was an achievement that they've made, and they wanted others to know. So I thought that was quite cute. Yeah.
If you can think of any
Yeah. So, what were we saying? Yeah.
I was asking about physics and emptiness, and if there's been an integration for you.
I think, to me, the connection between science and Buddhism is not so much in particulars. Sometimes, some people have written books, The Tao of Physics, and different books like this, which I've read and I found a little bit superficial, not from the physics side. They've often been written by Westerners who knew their subject, but the connections they were trying to make with Buddhism were quite tenuous and not really touching what we mean by selflessness or emptiness. There are many, many different levels of misunderstanding of reality. So there's many different levels of developing insight into what we might call emptiness, that phenomena are empty of something that we are attributing to them. We notice in everyday life, sometimes we think someone is an enemy, and later we find out that they've longed to be our friend, and that they were never really had any bad feelings toward us, and we see that all of our conceptions about them were empty. We see them later as a friend, or vice versa. We think someone is a friend and they're smiling, and we see on from some other evidence that they've been stealing our cutlery, or our small change, or they've been talking about us behind our back, and that they're empty of some kind of quality that we had attributed to them. But that isn't. That isn't exactly what we mean by emptiness, and none of the theories of physics, as I understand them, postulate anything that comes close to what's meant by emptiness. Yet, there is the things that are in parallel is that they are both searching for some fundamental answers to reality. Some modern physicists have begun to investigate the question of cognition and mind that they had not even dealt with before, because it's understood that whenever we make an observation, an experiment, we inevitably alter the results in some way by observing it, by our cognition, sometimes by our expectations. The way that we set up the experiment determines it in certain ways. So physicists are searching for some fundamental reality. They have that, and scientists in general. And also they understand that in order to find that, one has to work with the mind, with a certain quality of the mind, an analysis, which Buddhism, Northern Buddhism, cherishes very, very much. A kind of analytical mind, a wisdom that can analyze reality, see through our mistakes, our projections, and having become convinced of that, not just by some dry mathematical proof, but testing it again and again in many different ways, one can actually come to conviction of truths that one was not aware of before, that can actually affect one personally, not just like that for every action there's an equal and an opposite reaction in the physical realm may not affect one as much as knowing that with every mental action, emotional action, there's going to be some kind of rebound. I think for physicists that they are individuals, not just physicists, scientists in general, individuals who are questing for an ultimate, deeper meaning of reality, and who have that analytical mechanism, as part of their makeup. They're ready to be made into Buddhists, you know, if they so desire. They have all of the all of the prerequisites on that level. But it has to be something authentic. That's why it's said, it's interestingly enough, it's said in the teachings that to understand emptiness, it's not enough just to study that subject. It's almost impossible to realize emptiness without having some sense of renunciation. Interestingly, and this is perhaps what is often missing in some of the people who would like to investigate that just from a purely philosophical point of view, because it doesn't have the same driving force. If you have a sense of renunciation, what that means is a recognition that all of the things that we encounter in life, whatever they might appear, the riches, the fame, the power, the control, even the knowledge, all of it is it can't be taken with you. The satisfaction that you get from it is momentary. That even when you do experience something that you call satisfaction, all it is relief from something else. It's never continual satisfaction. If it were real satisfaction, the things that we experience in life through wealth, power, pleasure of the senses, companionship, if it was continual, if you were to sit next to Richard Gere, hold his hand, embrace him, you should continually feel blissful. 6 hours, 12 hours. But you don't. You need to get up, have a cup of tea. Everything that we experience is like taking, that we call pleasure, is like, it's a little bit like taking an aspirin when you have a toothache, some pain reliever. When you have a very bad pain, maybe some people have this experience, you have a very bad pain and you take a pain reliever, almost you say, I feel so good. The Buddha said, that is not, you can recognize that's not real pleasure. It's merely relief from some thirst, some itch, some discomfort you had before. If it were real pleasure, if it could be found in this world by the materialistic means, simply amassing knowledge or doing various things like this, that would be different than the Buddhist presentation of things. We have to somehow recognize this. When I was mentioning at another point a story of some young children that were fascinated by a candy in the corner. In order to really put energy dynamically and effectively, say, into recognizing emptiness, to be motivated by it, you have to recognize the first two noble truths. You have to recognize that all of the things, at least to some degree, you have to recognize to some degree that all of the things that we long after this lifetime, respect and love and fame and pleasure especially, that they're no more than relief, that they're not long-lasting, that we may not get them, even if we try, and that the memory of them, once we've had them, is never enough. Even you had something once, it's not going to sustain you for your whole lifetime. You want something else. And the real peace of mind is obtained, by understanding the cause of this situation, which has come about because of our karma, the actions that we've created, especially in the distant past lives, not necessarily the actions we've created this lifetime. They'll have their repercussions in the future. Seems like those are the main causes, karmic causes that we're experiencing now. I punch someone and they punch me back. That's the punch I give is going to have its repercussions sometime in the future. The fact that person punches me back is due to something I've done in the past, we would say in general. It's rare that karma would ripen in the same lifetime so quickly. These are things that are quite hidden in a sense. and one has to think about them, the mechanism of karma. It's said that even though you have to have a familiarity with this, with suffering, the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, which is karma, and its cause, which is ignorance and attachment and hatred. Those are the real causes of our karma in the past and in the present and the future. Still, although you need to have an understanding of those to really appreciate emptiness and to be motivated to meditate on it, to make it something part of your personality, still, it's not until you've gotten some insight into emptiness that you really develop really deep faith in karma. Because it's something that's deeply hidden, the relationship between causes and their effects. It's something that can't be perceived or even proved by ordinary means. It's something that the Buddha, with his omniscient consciousness, perceived. And it's through recognizing emptiness that one develops that incredible faith and confidence in Buddha as a perfect teacher, which then leads you back to reaffirming karma. Great beings, I think, who've really realized emptiness are even more careful about their behavior. You know, one might think, oh, once they've recognized emptiness, they can do anything, you know. They're not bound by karma. They recognize that everything we do, all of our effects on others, the good and bad effects we might have and the happiness we experience and so forth, are all a result of our past actions. So if we really want to help others, which is the Bodhisattva ideal, one tries to not only realize emptiness, but puts a lot of emphasis on trying to accumulate the causes to be beneficial continuously, which is not just the karma, but the motivation, you know.
You're such a good, what keeps you practicing?
Yeah, right. What keeps me practicing? Well, I think it's a feeling that, again, we were talking a little bit about before about whether enlightenment was possible this life and so forth. Somehow the feeling that there is a goal in the distance that I can begin to perceive more and more. And that there is, although I don't see any progress like in going from point A to point B, I can't really say there's any progress, but very close to point A, where I am now, there seems to be some, I'm dislodging myself from some long-seated bad habits and states of mind year by year. And to my baby practice, my very, not as energetic as even intermediate beings, just beginners practice, still I notice some development. And that keeps me going because I can see how easy it is to fall back at this point. One of my teachers, Geshe Darge, who's passed away some years ago, used to say it was practicing the path was like rolling a boulder uphill, to try to keep the mind in some virtuous state away from its usual daydreaming and fantasizing and anger and irritation and lust and so forth, into even a semblance of religious practice, of spiritual practice. Religious maybe sounds a bit too holy or something. Even spiritual or constructive, something that's wholesome and beneficial and happy for oneself and others. It's not easy, but it's so worthwhile. And you can start to notice it in your own life. You don't notice you change overnight. You become a Buddhist or you become a monk or nun, and suddenly you're different. If you have that expectation, you may be disappointed. But you notice over a period of time, over weeks, months, years, 5 years, 10 years, great difference in the way that you perceive the world, your expectations, how you behave, your basic state of happiness. And to me, that keeps me practicing, because to me, that's much, that's something tangible. That's something I could chew on, we would say, like a nice piece of pizza You can, what did they say? A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, to use a very bad hunting analogy. But it gets the flavor that if you have something, rather than talking about something distant that you don't know about whether it actually exists, but some real tangible effect in your own life, to me that keeps me practicing. Excuse me. In terms of applying emptiness, I think it's something that really depends on your understanding of emptiness, for one thing. On a certain level, even if you just have faith, you might have a lot of enthusiasm at one point, and you can just say to yourself, oh, this is empty, and take your mind away from the event that's irritating you, thinking about something else. That's really not an antidote in the sense of emptiness. It's just like, maybe, to a certain degree, it's kind of a temporary antidote. But the real meaning of emptiness is it's something that is an actual antidote to emptiness, to any of the afflictive states of mind, in that as you recognize the way that you're believing the situation has a certain solidity and findability and reality that's not really there. It takes a little bit of experience, I think, over time in actually recognizing that. Then the things that you're worried about, the things that either irritate you or you long for or you're worried about, recognizing, thinking about them, thinking about who's worrying, who's getting angry, who is it that wants this, that's so worried about getting this, that wants this so much. Just looking within you to try to find that sense of I that might actually be quite prominent there. It might be, saying, yeah, it's me, yeah, it's right. There is someone who wants this. But in time, as you begin to recognize how the person is merely a phenomena that's labeled onto this body and mind. There's no other I, the Buddha said. Just the name I, George, labeled down to this body and mind. Compare that with the way that the I is appearing. You can see it very clearly then. You can see that this I that seems to be manifesting in that dynamic situation, much different than just a concept that we attribute. We call something a chariot, or we call something a computer to a collection of parts. And if it has the ability to do some particular function. But with the I, there really seems something very personal. It's very dynamic. That's why the Buddha said it was very important to meditate on this, first of all, to get a real taste of emptiness. You compare the way that the I is appearing and to how it's said to exist, even if you don't know much about emptiness. And you can start to see that you're believing in something that is contrary to what at least the Buddha said is reality, that the fuel of the anger, the fuel of the desire, the fuel of the worry is this sense of I. I think that in itself, even before you've come to the conclusion that it doesn't exist, just to recognize that gives a lot of insight into the problem. You can start to see if that weren't real, if that did not exist, in fact, maybe I could overcome this. Maybe I wouldn't have that worry. Maybe if the outer world didn't exist in this concrete way that I envision it, that things would be different. Just to have that kind of doubt, some of the great Buddhist saints have said, shakes the foundations of samsara. And on the basis of that, then you can start to have the energy with renunciation as a fuel, with bodhicitta as a fuel, that's the method side that's giving you the energy to investigate emptiness. Then you can investigate the reasons why this isn't true. But to say that I've had any success in that, I would have to be exaggerating entirely. But I do notice, there's even just in the sense of recognizing slowly that I is the cause of the problem, becoming more and more convinced of that. That helped with a sense of, thinking about renunciation, thinking about the plight of others, talking to others, hearing their problems and seeing how very much they're grasping to this self that doesn't really exist in the way that they imagine somehow. We feel there's some kind of soul or meanness, I-ness. Where can you find it? Anyone ever found it? It's even one of the great religious questions of our Western religions, Christianity and so forth. It's almost, that's supposed to imply the ineffability, the unfindability of that is supposed to imply it's spiritual, that it's something that's in the spiritual realm, the soul. We get a taste of it, but we can't really find it. Anyway.
Your timing